What if I told you that the most devastating invasion of the 21st century didn't happen on the battlefield, but in a boardroom? No tanks, no bombs, no soldiers or guns, just a handshake and a smile. History remembers the fall of Rome, the collapse of Byzantium, the Russian Revolution in 1917, and the Allies storming the beaches of Normandy. But this invasion, it was quieter, more patient, and has changed the global landscape more than all of those events combined. Imagine losing your job, not to AI or a robot, but to someone 6,000 miles away, making $3 a day. Not because Mr. or Ms. $3 is better at their job or more skilled, but because the global economic system shifted almost overnight. This scenario isn't a hypothetical one. This is a reality that affected and still affects billions of people around the world, including you. This reshaping of the biggest governments and countries in the world didn't happen by gunfire. It was a siege by supply chain. This is the ultimate geopolitical deep dive. From collapsed empires to disastrous invasions, this channel explores the world's most critical geopolitical miscalculations. We uncover the strategic blunders, hidden motives, and unintended consequences behind the biggest foreign policy failures in modern history. Whether you're a history buff, political science enthusiast, or just curious about how power shapes the world, you're in the right place. Expect sharp analysis, powerful storytelling, and eye-opening insights into the decisions that change nations forever. Today, we're talking about how allowing China into the World Trade Organization was a $17 trillion mistake that broke the West. Today, almost every American industry, from tech to textiles, is entangled on some level of dependence on Chinese manufacturing. A single iPhone illustrates how this fact stands as a plain and simple truth around the world. Designed in California, assembled in China, sold around the world, what used to be an industrial advantage for the US has become an outsourced vulnerability. The consequences of that economic shift are larger than the fall of the Berlin Wall, longer lasting than 9/11, and depending on your perspective, potentially more disruptive than COVID-19. China's entrance into the global economic market after accession into the World Trade Organization, WTO, in 2001 reshaped the global economy, shifted the balance of power, and changed your life in ways you probably haven't even noticed. And this is not abstract policy talk. This has touched your job, your data, your buying power, the water you drink, and the air you breathe. In early June of this year, Citibank quietly cut thousands of jobs in its Chinese data analytics division. According to the official line that Citibank gave to the press, the move was motivated by restructuring, but inside sources suggest something deeper: mounting concern over China's role in our tech systems and information security. Is this the unraveling of a 25-year gamble that began when the West welcomed China into the World Trade Organization? At the time of China's WTO application in the late 1990s, its economy ranked around 13th or 14th globally, with a nominal GDP of just over $1.2 trillion substantial, especially compared to countries like Mexico, whose GDP was less than a quarter of China's. In 1990, the contrast becomes less impressive when you consider that China's population was more than 13 times larger. In short, China was far from a global powerhouse, economically or militarily. In fact, for decades prior, China was synonymous with scarcity and poverty. In the early 1980s, a typical family in Chengdu or Wuhan might live in a one-room apartment provided by a state employer. Heat was sporadic, food was rationed, and consumer goods were non-existent. A resident might stand in line for hours just to buy a pair of shoes, only to discover that the store only had one size available that day. Nobody owned a car. Nobody. Even owning a bicycle was considered an extravagant luxury. Likewise, nobody owned a refrigerator or even knew anyone who did. The mention of products like Coca-Cola or jeans was done only in a whisper to those brave enough to risk prison by turning to the black market. Travel outside one's province, let alone the country, required government approval. The average citizen in China in the 1980s earned the equivalent of $10 to $20 a month. Savings, if there were any, were often kept under the mattress, and daily meals consisted of cabbage, rice, and occasional pork, if ration tickets allowed. Entertainment consisted of state-sponsored radio dramas or a rare movie showing of a heavily censored foreign film. This was the China that approached the global stage closed off, state-run, and struggling to support its bursting population of 1.13 billion people. Famines had ravaged the country in the mid-20th century, and the nation's rigid command economy offered little room for productivity or innovation. To help manage the strain of overpopulation, the government implemented the famous one-child policy in 1979, an attempt to control what they viewed as a surplus population in a resource-starved state. Fast forward to 2023, China's nominal GDP has surged past $17.8 trillion, making it the second largest economy in the world and the largest in terms of purchasing power parity. PPP. The communist Chinese state is a country transformed from one that couldn't feed its people to one that feeds global commerce. To understand China's dramatic economic transformation, we must begin with Deng Xiaoping, the architect of China's modern revival. After the chaos of the Cultural Revolution and Mao Zedong's death in 1976, Deng emerged as China's paramount leader in 1978. He launched a program known as Gaizhi Kaifang, reform and opening up, that would reshape the nation. In 1986, Deng Xiaoping said, "Poverty is not socialism, to be rich is glorious." Deng's reforms began with agriculture. In 1978, the household responsibility system allowed farmers to keep surplus crops after meeting the state quotas. Productivity soared, and within a few years, China was feeding itself more efficiently than ever. By 1980, Deng established special economic zones, SEZDs, in cities like Shenzhen, Zhuhai, and Xiamen. These areas offered tax incentives and relaxed regulations to attract foreign investment, a radical departure from the communist orthodoxy. Throughout the next decade, China decollectivized industry, encouraged private business, allowed foreign joint ventures, and welcomed capitalist tools to achieve its socialist goals. Deng remained pragmatic about this departure from communist economic policy, saying, "It doesn't matter whether a cat is black or white, as long as it catches mice." In 1986, China applied to join the GATT, the organization that would later become the WTO. But the West made tough demands: reduce tariffs, rewrite laws, and protect intellectual property. Seeing participation in the global economy as the only path to state prosperity, China spent 15 years restructuring state enterprises, amending thousands of laws, and promising to level the playing field. In 1992, after a brief backlash following the Tiananmen Square crackdown, Deng famously took a southern tour to Shenzhen to reaffirm his commitment to reform. His message was clear: economic modernization was non-negotiable. By December 2001, these new shifts in Chinese policies had turned villages into factories, peasants into workers, and China into a trading nation. But the full global impact of that shift had just begun. China was admitted to the WTO, becoming its 143rd member. Global leaders, including U.S. Presidents Bill Clinton and George W. Bush, hailed it as a victory for trade liberalization and a step toward global integration. The dream that backfired. Take Dayton, Ohio, a once thriving manufacturing hub. After China's WTO entry, major employers shuttered factories, moved operations abroad, and left behind hollowed-out communities. Dayton was just one of many American industrial centers that fell victim to the Chinese influence on the global economy. Jobs in these places didn't just vanish, they were absorbed into China's expanding industrial zones. Economists like MIT's David Autor have called this China shock. His research shows not only a steep drop in U.S. manufacturing employment, but a surge in political division and economic despair tied directly to outsourcing. One worker interviewed in Flint, Michigan, put it bluntly, "I trained Meyer placement. Then I packed up my station and watched it get loaded onto a shipping crate bound for Guangdong." From 2001 to 2020, wages for American manufacturing workers barely rose, even as corporate profits soared and CEO pay skyrocketed. Meanwhile, China's industrial cities boomed. It was like watching Main Street get packed up and shipped overseas in shipping containers. When China joined, world leaders celebrated, no doubt influenced by the visions of former Soviet Union countries embracing Western culture and trade. U.S. presidents felt this acceptance into the WTO would open China's society. Multinationals rushed in, supply chains exploded, prices dropped. Consumers won, right? Maybe not. There was a catch, a big one. Between 2000 and 2007, the U.S. lost over 2 million manufacturing jobs. Entire industries moved offshore. This became known as the China shock. Small towns were gutted, wages stagnated, communities fractured, and China? It didn't democratize. In fact, it tightened control, becoming the world's second largest economy under one-party rule. Why are Chinese goods so cheap? There are a few major causes. First, Environmental shortcuts. Chinese factories often dodge the rules that other nations are subject to. Pollution is part of the Chinese business model. So restrictions, laws, fees, and fines for pollution that challenge U.S. companies are conspicuously absent from their Chinese counterparts. Second, labor exploitation, where laws protect Western workers with minimum wage, safe working conditions, and other job-related benefits. Chinese workers are subjected to long hours, unsafe conditions, and bottom-barrel wages. Yet after nearly 25 years of Chinese abuses of the WTO expectations, the cycle continues. China promised to recycle waste for the U.S., but many of these recyclables are never processed at all, but just dumped into landfills or worse, jettisoned into the ocean, creating one of many garbage clouds, polluting the ocean and marine life. Then, there's tech. In 2018, Bloomberg reported on the Supermicro spy chip scandal, accusing China of embedding spy chips in US-bound servers. The story was disputed, but the fear stuck. We don't know what's in the hardware we rely on. Author Yuval Noah Harari warns, cheap Chinese chips may be modern Trojan horses hardware-based backdoors into global infrastructure. Citibank's recent layoffs in China likely tied to fears of data governance, not just cost-cutting, WSJ source. It's not just espionage. China has long forced foreign technology transfers from Western firms. Further, China is infamous for piracy of software and has a global reputation for flagrant IP infringement. Meanwhile, the WTO, designed to enforce the rules, has struggled to keep China accountable for these infractions. WTO advocates argue that China's entry was an absolute win for globalization. U.S. families saved about $1,500 a year thanks to cheaper goods. Hundreds of millions of Chinese citizens rose out of poverty. Global supply chains became more efficient. Innovation accelerated. Trade built interdependence, supposedly reducing the risk of armed conflict. In this view, pulling China into a rules-based global system was better than leaving it isolated. Economic integration, they argue, is preferable to ideological confrontation. There is one big win for China's involvement in the global economic market: humanity. Naturally, the 25 years of lucrative trade with China have had a significant effect on the once impoverished people of China. In 2025, that same impoverished family we discussed from before China entered the WTO has traded their cold, one-room apartment for a modern living space in a high-rise apartment located in a district linked with electric buses, bike share stations, and 5G towers. The average middle-class family, yes, now there is a middle class, owns at least one car, likely electric. And that family who once stood in lines for rationed food now orders groceries via smartphone for same-day delivery. Instead of relying on ration cards, they browse an endless scroll of options on Taobao or JD.com, China's homegrown equivalent of Amazon. Teenagers stream K-pop and play high-end online games on domestically produced smartphones. The family vacations cosmetically in Hainan or internationally in Thailand, thanks to increasing passport access and rising disposable income. Nearly all adults in the household are white-collar workers, some in tech, logistics, or finance, having graduated from one of China's rapidly expanding universities. And while Westerners worry about TikTok, young Chinese users are already migrating to homegrown apps like Douyin, Xiaohongshu, and Bilibili. And not all benefits of China's membership in the WTO are manifest in China. Apple is arguably the most iconic US company to benefit from China's manufacturing boom. While Apple designs its products in California, it outsources nearly all of its assembly to Foxconn, a Taiwanese company with massive operations in mainland China. As of 2023, Foxconn employed over 1 million workers in China, primarily dedicated to assembling Apple products. This labor cost savings, combined with highly developed Chinese infrastructure, allowed Apple to maximize profit margins while keeping product prices competitive. In the fourth quarter of 2022, Apple posted over $20 billion in profit, much of it due to cost-efficient supply chains rooted in China. Tim Cook, Apple's CEO, has repeatedly praised China's manufacturing ecosystem, calling it unmatched in scale and speed. In one interview, he said, "You could take every tool and die maker in the United States and probably put them in this room. In China, you would have to have multiple football fields." Apple isn't alone. Walmart sources over 70% of its merchandise from Chinese factories, enabling Walmart's low-price strategy. Nike manufactures a significant portion of its shoes and apparel in China. General Motors sold more cars in China than in the US in 2023, and Tesla built a massive gigafactory in Shanghai to supply Chinese and Asian markets. China's military rise mirrors its economic ascent. In 2000, its official defense budget stood at under $20 billion. Today, it exceeds $220 billion, making China the world's second highest military spender, trailing only the United States. Some analysts estimate its real defense expenditures, adjusted for purchasing power, are even higher. But economic power doesn't stay confined to factories and ports. China's rise in global trade, supercharged by its WTO entry, fielded an unprecedented surge in state revenue. That money didn't just go to infrastructure or consumer industries, it went to weapons development. This economic engine has powered the development of hypersonic missiles, cyber warfare divisions, and a rapidly blue water navy. While smiling across the negotiating table, China supports states that openly challenge Western norms. It is North Korea's largest trading partner, helping Pyongyang withstand sanctions while launching missiles over Japan. Through initiatives like the Belt and Road and yuan-denominated trade, China is building an alternate economic system outside Western influence. China has also increased energy trade with Russia, buying oil and gas in record quantities since the invasion of Ukraine, thereby undermining Western sanctions intended to isolate Moscow. Today, the United States remains China's largest trading partner. In 2024, the U.S. imported $438.9 billion in goods from China, while exporting only $143.5 billion, creating a trade deficit of nearly $295.4 billion. It is a sober imbalance like falling behind on rent in a system we built, but no longer control. The U.S. also runs a significant services trade relationship with China, having grown from just $5.6 billion in 2001 to over $46.7 billion by 2000 and 2023. What began as a handshake has developed into a full-blown triple alarm dilemma. We got cheap goods, but we also got economic dependence, cyber vulnerabilities, global pollution, and a military superpower that we helped fund. Was it a mistake, or was it a devil's bargain? Either way, the bill is coming due.